Use has changed drastically over the years. That's why a coalition of organizations say they've launched a campaign to ensure Mainers have a choice with how they want to heat their homes or businesses. The bipartisan Maine Energy Choice campaign was announced this morning at Dysarts in Bangor. State Senators Joe Baldacci and Trey Stewart joined the president and CEO of Maine Energy Marketers Association. The coalition formed in response to pending federal and state legislation looking to implement limits on the use of heating oil, natural gas, and more. The president and CEO says they've done polling over the last 3 years that shows 87% of Maine voters do not want the state to pass legislation to restrict their ability to choose how to heat their homes.
Mandates on individual consumers that are going to be unaffordable and also lead to an economic decline is going to be counterproductive to anything we're trying to achieve.
So that's really the key here is it a government mandate? Are we excluding one or another type of energy to fit somebody's agenda, as opposed to are we doing the right thing for the people that we represent?
Baldacci went on to say that Maine can maintain incentives for renewable energy without having to force unaffordable decisions. Stewart echoed that by adding the technology needed for some alternative heating methods may not be economically achievable at a time when inflation is a major concern. For more information on the campaign and to find a list of all of the candidates who signed the Energy Choice Pledge, you can find that link on our website.